Good afternoon, everyone. We are gradually letting folks into today's JStream discussion with former Attorney General Eric Holder about some of the work that he and his organization are doing to try to save our democracy and promote a more just and fair system. We'll give this a few minutes as the participants are transferred into the briefing, and then we will get started. Very good turnout today, Mr. Attorney General. It's a topic of huge interest to our movement, and we're really honored to have you with us. I see that we're almost have 250 folks in, so I'm going to get started here. For those who don't know me, I'm Jeremy Benamy, and I'm the president of J Street. I'm honored to be joined by Attorney General Eric Holder. People may wonder, why is a advocacy organization that is focused on Israel and the Middle East and on trying to achieve an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict focusing on redistricting at the state level as one of its topics for discussion? And it's a result of our belief that J Street has a home within the broader progressive movement, within the broader movement for reform and change in this country. The work that we do as we lobby for American help to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and to find a path forward that's rooted in justice and rooted in equality and rooted in democracy. Our belief that those very values that we fight for when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are the very same values that we have to be fighting for in this country. These past months have shown perhaps in even starker relief the amount of work that is to be done in our own country, and J Street is very, very deeply committed to being part of the answer to some of the problems that are facing us in this country. I would just note as we get into our conversation today that John Lewis, who we lost this weekend, is somebody who was very close to us at J Street. He keynoted one of our national conferences. He was a endorsee of our PAC, and he would talk to us frequently about the importance of standing for the same set of values, no matter what the issue was, that we have to stand for equality, we have to stand for justice. And I think most importantly, he was constantly urging us to get into good trouble. And if anybody is causing some good trouble today, it is Attorney General Eric Holder, who has started what I think is an exceedingly important new initiative, not that new, I guess, at this point, and you'll be telling us a bit more about it. He's the chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, and he has been a nationally and internationally recognized leader on a whole range of legal and civil rights issues for decades. Of course, you all know that he was the Attorney General in the Obama administration, was the third longest serving Attorney General, the first African American to hold that post. In addition, he was the Deputy Attorney General in the Clinton administration. He was a judge of the Superior Court here in DC, and has also been a partner at the law firm of Covington and Burling. And Attorney General Holder, I think the aspect of your bio that means the most to me is that you're married to the woman who delivered both of my wonderful children. And so you have a special place, your family has a special place in my heart and our family's heart. And I want to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about the committee and about the work that you all are doing in this cycle.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Jeremy, and hello to everybody. I hope that everybody, your family, your loved ones, I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy. Jeremy, thanks for that introduction. And in Washington, D.C., I'm really known as Mr. Sharon. That's my wife's name. People will come up to me all the time and say, "Hey, are you Eric Holder?" And I go, yeah. Say, "You're married too?" And here we go. Everybody loves Sharon. Me, not maybe. Her approval rating is substantially higher than mine. But it is really, it's great to be here with everybody at J Street. It's an honor to talk with you all today about, I think, some of the most important issues that are facing our democracy today, as well as the world. One of the concepts in Judaism that resonates most with me, and I remember from my days at PS 145 and PS 148 when all of my classmates were going off to Hebrew school, but the notion of tikkun olam, literally repair of the world. In 2020, we've learned just how much repair I think that this world actually needs. From a global pandemic, climate change, crisis of racial and economic inequality, the work to make this world better, to repair the world, can feel daunting, and it's even more critical that I think we all be engaged in this. What I'd almost call like a noble mission. Now, I'm here today to talk specifically about one area where our world, and I guess more specifically our nation, needs repair, and that's, as Jeremy was saying, protecting our democracy. We've all had to watch in horror as we saw primary elections in states like Wisconsin and Georgia struggle to hold, safe elections amid the pandemic. You remember those, unbelievably long lines in the middle of a pandemic. This can't happen again in the fall. Not at the top of the ticket, and not for, importantly, and where I've been focusing a lot of my efforts, for these so-called down ballot races. Now, this shouldn't be a partisan issue. Everybody in this country, no matter their political affiliation, is at risk of contracting the virus. Leaders from both parties, I would think, need to step up and do what's right for the people of this nation. So let me be clear that this is bigger than statewide elections. I mean, what happened in those primaries in Wisconsin and in Georgia is a microcosm of what the nation could face in November, and should serve as a cautionary tale and a call to action by our leaders to make sure that that doesn't happen. We have to act with a sense of urgency to prevent that that kind of chaos from happening elsewhere in the United States. Now, this sounds partisan, but it really is not. It's clear to me, I think this is objective, that the current president, his administration, are not up to the job. I mean, any other president, Republican or Democrat, would have seized the opportunity to mobilize the nation, galvanize an effort that would effectively deal with voting in the pandemic, deal with the pandemic itself. I mean, can you imagine any other president in recent history who would let the states figure it out and refuse to lead an effort by the federal government? This has cost the nation dearly, both in terms of our economic stability as well as the number of lives that have been lost. And our elections this November at the federal level are certainly of existential importance. I get that. But as chairman of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, I'm also bound and determined to make sure that we collectively don't lose sight of important state and local elections. These races are critical for a fair redistricting process, which will happen in 2021, and will ensure that Congress, as well as state legislatures, the House of Representatives, as well as state legislatures, reflects the will of the people. So we're going to be doing our part to win at the state level to ensure that a Biden administration is not hobbled by another decade of politicians in Congress and in state legislatures who come from unfairly gerrymandered districts that are intentionally drawn, as one court said, with surgical precision, so that these self-serving politicians are not held accountable by the voters they're supposed to represent. And to be fair here, although the focus of our attention is on what has happened in the Republican Party in 2011, Democrats have also been guilty of gerrymandering, and I've stood against that as well. So we have at the NDRC a proven, I think, comprehensive four-pronged plan that allows us to tailor our work so that we look at each state individually and then use the tactic in that state that's going to be most effective. And those prongs are elections, supporting candidates who will stand for a fair redistricting process. Reform. I actually think that the best way to do this is to take it out of the hands of politicians altogether and put it in the hands of these nonpartisan commissions, as they have in California and in Arizona. We now have them as a result of the work that we did in Michigan, Colorado, Utah, and Missouri. Litigation, we bring lawsuits where we try to break up a partisan and racial gerrymandering. Can't bring partisan cases in the federal courts anymore as a result of, I think, a really bad Supreme Court decision. So now we bring those cases in state courts. We had great success in Pennsylvania as well as in North Carolina. We also focus on infrastructure. And there we're talking about our advocacy program, which is called All on the Line. I urge everybody to look at that on the internet and maybe get involved. Our advocacy program, All on the Line. But infrastructure also means making sure that we have the technological capabilities to make sure that we are drawing the lines in the way that our opponents did in 2011. Democrats got caught flat-footed in 2011. Can't have that in 2021. So one more thing, my last thing. Given what's at stake in November in terms of the presidency and fair redistricting, we've also expanded the scope of our work just a bit to include protecting elections and voters this year during the global health crisis. It's always been a tenet of our redistricting efforts that all Americans have a chance to elect the candidate of their choice. And to make sure that we live up to that, and in the furtherance of redistricting next year, we need to take on, I think, this election protection work over the next few months. And we're really trying to make sure that as many people have the ability to vote at home as they want. People call it vote by mail. I prefer to call it vote at home, which I think is a better way of selling it. And it actually is a truer way of describing it, because what we're trying to do is allow people to vote at home so they don't have to do, as I said, what you saw in Wisconsin and in Georgia, stand in long lines during a pandemic. But we also want to make sure that for those communities that want to vote in person, typically communities of color, for a variety of reasons, like to cast their votes in person. We want to make sure that we have healthy polling places so that you can do either. This is just a challenging time for our country, but it's also a challenging time for us as individuals. We can't allow a pandemic to undermine the principles of our representative democracy. So that's kind of what we are doing at the NDRC. We formed ourselves back in January of 2017. So we're relatively new, and we are the designated strategic hub for all things redistricting. And that's kind of how we do it, the targets that we have. And as I said, I'm glad to be here with you, and more than glad to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to urge those who are joining us to put your questions in the Q&A box. I think everybody's experienced enough at this point in Zoom to understand that's where we will draw the questions from, and I'll be sort of picking and choosing and handing some off to the Attorney General. I did want to just ask you if you could highlight for us what are some of the victories that you have had already just in the 4 years that you've been at it, or 3.5 years that you've been at it. I know there's a few things along the way, and maybe you could just highlight to give people a little more concrete sense.
Sure. We've had successful litigation in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Virginia, where we have challenged on a partisan redistricting that was done in North Carolina, for instance. Again, you can't bring it in the federal courts. We brought the case in the North Carolina state courts using the North Carolina state constitution. We now have redrawn maps there that citizens will be voting on this year that will decrease the disparity between the number of votes the Democrats got in North Carolina and the number of seats that they got. We have a reform measure now in Ohio that we were able to put in place. In Ohio, you have Republicans winning about 52% of the congressional votes, and they have about 85% of the seats in the congressional seats. In Virginia, filed litigation to challenge the maps there on the basis of racial gerrymandering. Their new maps drawn, elections already held in 2019, and now Democrats are in charge of the governorship in both houses in the legislature. And I think interestingly, this is I think an important point. Democrats there have said, well, we're not going to use that power to gerrymander. We are going to use that power and give it to a commission to draw the lines. And so Democrats are giving up power that they got in Virginia. We've also supported candidates who have been successful. Gubernatorial candidates in Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada broke up Republican, what we call Republican trifectas there. Supported, as I said earlier, these independent commissions, and now have them in about 4, 5 states. And so those are some of the things we do. As I said, we look at each state individually and decide who's the person or who are the people who are most responsible for fair redistricting, and then making sure that we support them. In Texas in 2018, we flipped 12 seats in the Texas State House, which is one of our targets. This year, we need to flip 9 additional seats for Democrats to break up the Republican trifecta there. And I remember being in Texas, and the leader of the Democratic caucus in the State House there said, "You must feel pretty lonely." So I'm not sure I understand what you mean. He said, "You're the only national Democrats who are here working at the state level. Everybody was there for better," which I totally understood, made total sense. But we were working on the state house races, and as I said, we flipped 12 seats. And what's interesting there is that because you're not running a statewide race, even in a big state like Texas, relatively, and I learned this through politics, when I say this, relatively small amounts of money, $50,000, $75,000 can have an influence on a race, as opposed to, statewide race, we've got to raise millions of dollars. And so I've endorsed at this point about 100 candidates in North Carolina, Texas, and in other states. We've moved money to those candidates early because they don't have the ability to do big events in the pandemic, can't knock on doors. President Obama will be endorsing candidates at the state level. He did that in a couple of other cycles since we've been in existence, which is kind of an unusual thing to have a president, a former president, endorsing candidates at the state level. Now, he's involved in this effort and has identified NDRC as his chief political involvement in his post-presidency. So that gives you a sense of the victories that we have had. 2020 is going to be an interesting year. We're trying to break up Republican trifectas in a number of tough states, Texas, as I said, Georgia, Florida. So we have our, we have our work cut out for us this year. But I'm optimistic about, on the basis of the experience that we have and the success that we've had, that we'll be successful again in November.
One of the questions in the chat was echoed something that I was wondering as you were talking about the importance of 2020 and the census. What work are you doing, if any, on the census itself? Because obviously the whole concept does depend on having an accurate and complete census, and I would think that'd be critical to your work. So I'm curious what your engagement has been on that.
No, Jeremy, that's a really good point. And the person who posed the question, that's a really good question. We have identified early on that the census was a critical part to our efforts. The redistricting that's done in 2021 is done on the basis of a census that is done in 2020. The census is the foundation for fair redistricting. And so we've tried to raise people's awareness of how important the census is. $900 billion in federal aid gets doled out on the basis of the census. Obviously, representation, who gets what seats and where, based again on census involvement. We filed a lawsuit. We filed one of the lawsuits against the inclusion of the citizenship question on the census. I'm proud to say my law firm did it on a pro bono basis, and we won that case. And the citizenship question is no longer on the census, though I suspect we're going to hear something in terms of an executive order in the next few weeks. Is my intel and my gut tells me we're going to hear something that they're going to try to give this life again, and so we'll probably be back in court in that regard. But I've also tried, as I've gone around before the pandemic, and now I'm doing it virtually, to raise awareness about the need for census participation, especially in communities of color. Making sure that in Texas, for instance, which has been a real focus of ours, that people in the Hispanic community raise their hands and make sure that they are accounted. It's an interesting dynamic there, where people in the Hispanic community, especially along the border, are legitimately concerned about what happens if you're in a mixed household with people who are documented, people who are not documented. And if somebody raises their hand to be counted, there's a fear that this administration somehow would use that information to take an adverse action against an undocumented person, even though, and this is what I've tried to share with everybody, that the laws, the regulations, court cases have all make a clear line between information gathered by the Department of Commerce as a result of the census effort and what gets shared with law enforcement or immigration authorities. It's you preaching in a way that you against a recent history that gives people very legitimate concerns. But we have been really focused on the census. I've been pushing to have the census results, since it has been delayed, to be released on a rolling basis, so that the states that are going to do redistricting earliest in 2021 get their census data before states that will be doing it later on. States have, either by constitution or by statute, deadlines by which they have to complete the redistricting process. And so we have been working to get the Commerce Department, the Census Bureau, to release that information, as I said, on a rolling basis. So this is a big focus, a very, very large focus for us.
Yeah, there's a couple of folks in the Q&A queue, but I know that a number of folks who are dialing in are trying to figure out where best to invest their resources for this cycle. And obviously what you're doing is so critically structurally important. Can you give a sense of the scope of your effort? What's the budget? Where are your greatest needs? What are some of the things that you are needing further investment in?
Yeah, well, we have ways in which people can contribute that are kind of lined up with our the prongs that we have. We have a PAC that supports our electoral efforts. We have a 501c3 that supports litigation that we have brought and will be bringing. And we have a 501c4 that supports our advocacy and infrastructure work. So we have, for those who want to contribute, we have all kinds of ways in which you can help us in that regard. We have raised, I think, a total of about $70 million since we began in January of 2017. We are, and that's from a mailing list of zero, a mailing list that did not, or an email list that did not exist. And so we've had to build it all up. In the early stages, Speaker Pelosi and former Governor Terry McAuliffe were very helpful as I went around to try to introduce the concept to people. What I'm most proud of, I think, in our fundraising, though, is that we've raised now about $6 million a year online, with an average contribution of about $31, I think $32. And I think it's an indication that people are starting to understand that redistricting and gerrymandering, which in January of 2017, I remember at the first press conference, a CNN reporter asked me, this sounds kind of wonky, ethereal. How are you going to make this, make people get that this is important? And I said words that I maybe would have changed, but what I said was, it's my duty to make redistricting sexy. And that, at least it got reported. I didn't feel great. And even now, as I say it now, I feel a little awkward saying that, but I think we've succeeded in that people now understand that there's a direct connection between gerrymandering and voter suppression, between gerrymandering and the lack of ability to expand, Medicare when people overwhelmingly want to do it, gerrymandering and our failure to have sensible gun safety laws, these crazy, women's reproductive laws that are coming out of gerrymandered legislatures. There's a whole range of things now that people understand. So if you care about, these specific issues, you have to be also concerned about gerrymandering. And I think that's, as we've gotten better at that and people have understood it, and it is now an issue, I think, that when I go out and speak to people, they get it. And that, I think, is at least in part the reason why we have been as successful as we've been with regard to our fundraising.
And I think the fact that people get it is reflected in the fact we have 350 people that have joined us for this conversation this afternoon. So it's one of our higher attended conversations, because I think people do get that anything that we want to achieve, whatever the issue is, it depends on a safe and fair functioning democracy. And we don't have that. And this is the critical work to doing that.
Jeremy, I thought it was my good looks that got everybody here. It's all right. I'll take it. However they come, I'll take it,
Right. But I think it might have been the topic. I'm not positive. I'd say a quarter of the questions are on the question of election integrity. I don't suppose that that's directly under your purview, but certainly as former Attorney General and as an interested observer and citizen, there's just a lot of concern that's reflected here, but reflected everywhere that I am engaging in whether or not it really is going to be possible to hold an election this November that we can all have faith in, and that this president and the apparatus around him are actually not going to stand in the way of. I don't know whether or not your committee or other groups, are directly engaged in this, but as a former Attorney General, people would like reassurance that there's checks here in the system that we can count on the election results. I'm curious what your response to some of these concerns is.
No, I think those concerns are legitimate ones. If you just look at before the pandemic, I would have said I was concerned about these voter suppression techniques that have been used and are going to be used again in November. The need for these unnecessary photo IDs, the purging of voter rolls. Republican Party has said they're going to put out 50,000 poll watchers. I'm sure that they're not going to be as benign as they have us believe. So there is that. But now when you look at the pandemic and the way in which a very logical solution to that pandemic and voting is the use of vote at home, vote by mail, and the way in which President Trump has tried to make people believe that this will result in fraud, an unfair election, when all of the experience that we have with voting at home does not bear that out. It also interestingly does not show that it favors one party over the other. The best studies show that if you do vote at home, vote by mail, it increases the turnout more people actually participate, but the levels of support for both parties go up at about the same, on average about 2%. So there's no basis to believe that one party is favored, and there's no basis to believe on the basis of that experience that some fraud would be involved. But I think we're going to have to make sure, and we have relationships with groups that are going to be mobilized on a state-by-state basis to make sure that everybody who wants to vote has the ability to vote, that if we do use vote by mail, we have filed lawsuits in this regard in Wisconsin, and we're successful there, to make sure that votes are counted, not that you don't put the cutoff at the receipt of ballots on the day of the election. You say that the cutoff should be on the day that you have to have it postmarked on the day of the election, with 3-4 days after that for receipt of those ballots. We were able to get the judges as well as the Supreme Court. They gave a kind of a mixed decision in Wisconsin, but the Supreme Court of the United States agreed with that proposition. So we have to come up with ways in which we are adapting to these new techniques that are going to be used, old techniques that have been in play, and try to blunt all the efforts that are going to be made to make this election, to put their hands on the scale, put their thumbs on the scale, to somehow thwart the will of the American people. So it's something that we have turned our attention to a greater degree than I might have expected, given the pandemic. But our thought ultimately was, we can put all these great structures in place, but we have to make sure that people who use these structures are going to have their votes counted and have the ability to vote. And so that's why I've been doing more of this. I'm going to be talking to the Senate Democrats, I think, later this week. And one of the things I'm going to be stressing with them is the need to make sure that money is in the next COVID relief bill, that money gets to the states to do these elections in appropriate ways. They gave about $400 million in the first bill. They need probably another $3.5 to $4 billion to make that happen. It's been passed by the House. Hopefully the Senate will do the right thing. So yeah, we're focused on this issue and working with groups that are engaged in this effort. But here's one thing I would really urge people. We as American citizens too often don't take into account the power that we have, an engaged, focused American citizenry, advocating, making sure that our elections are done in as transparent a way as is possible. We can play a very important role. So I would urge everybody to find these organizations that are engaged in these efforts, and then join them, work with them to make sure that our voices are heard, and make people understand, politicians understand, that there'll be an electoral consequence, for people who are not going to stand for a fair and transparent vote.
You mentioned federal legislation, and a couple of folks are asking your thoughts about the House passed H.R. 4 and whether that kind of legislation does impact gerrymandering, and whether or not you see in a Senate potentially, from the future, is this the type of model that could be passed into actual federal law?
Yeah, I mean, the House bills, I think, really are the way to go, with the expansion of early voting, a whole range of anti-gerrymandering things as well, and just good electoral reform generally. I mean, if you look at it, the things that are in those bills are not really partisan ones, in the sense that they don't really favor one party or the other. But I think one party looks at these bills and is concerned that somehow a fair vote will result in less support for them. And that's a sad commentary. It seems to me that if that in fact is the case, you need to be thinking about ways in which you can change your appeal, or increase your appeal to the voters, as opposed to figuring out ways that you can cheat. Because people always say, well, what is gerrymandering? Well, at its base, gerrymandering, voter suppression, that's cheating. And so think about ways in which you can modify the positions that you've taken, or understand that the positions that you're taking are generating the necessary electoral support. I think, unfortunately, and maybe it'll take a tsunami, a landslide election, but I think at this point, too many Republicans are comfortable with being a minority party that exercises majority power. And that simply, I think it's just something that we can't allow to happen. We've seen it in the state legislatures. I went through some of the numbers where, Ohio, Wisconsin, North Carolina, fewer votes than Democrats, way more, way more power, way more seats than they should have. It happened in the House of Representatives as well. A couple of cycles, Democrats got 1 million more votes than Republicans and had a 33 seat deficit. Think, what's that all about? And it's all a function again of gerrymandering. And so the House bills deal with again, a whole host of election reforms, not the least of which is to decrease the possibility that gerrymandering can happen. But again, it's neutral, and it would have, if passed, it would have an impact on Democrats in, say, Illinois, in Maryland, where there's a gerrymandered House seat in Maryland. There's no question about that, and we have stood against that when those Supreme Court lawsuits were being considered. One of the states was Maryland. We stood on the side of the plaintiffs. So again, this is something that is, I think, good for our democracy and neutral in its intent.
And since it is neutral in its intent, and it should be a bipartisan issue, besides, I think somebody mentioned here, Arnold Schwarzenegger supportive, but are there any other senior Republicans that you've been able to recruit into this?
No, not really. I've looked for Republican allies in this battle in the hope that we could make it as bipartisan a thing as we could. And Arnold Schwarzenegger has certainly been somebody who has done events with me. We've done op-eds together. He has stood for this. But it's we've not been able to get other Republicans to join us. Now, I've been attacked, by Scott Walker, the former governor of Wisconsin, who says that what I'm really trying to do is gerrymander for Democrats. And I keep saying in every appearance I make, this is not an attempt to gerrymander for Democrats. This is an attempt to bring fairness into the system, because I am really confident that in a fair system, progressives, progressive Democrats will do just fine. We will do just fine if the system is fair. It doesn't mean we're going to win all over the place. Some states are red, and that's fine. But we will get the representation that I think that we deserve. But getting Republican support for this effort has been just really difficult.
I want to just take you to a different level of question. Really, it's a national level, not the local level. There's a couple of questions about your view in this era about the Electoral College, and then also about the National Popular Vote initiative, the interstate compact that's being pursued, whether you think that there are any reforms that might be in the realm of possibility on either of those fronts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if I had absolute power for about 24 hours, there'd be a whole litany of things I'd like to do. Pretty close to the top would be the elimination of the Electoral College. Our elections are basically decided now on the basis of 6, 7, 8 states, battleground states. Republican candidates for president don't campaign in California, don't campaign in New York. Democratic presidential candidate doesn't campaign in Texas. That's, what sense does that make? And with all due respect to these states, they spend huge amounts of time in Iowa and New Hampshire, great states. I love them and all, but they get a disproportionate amount of attention. So yeah, but the reality is that it's going to be difficult, I think, to eliminate the Electoral College, to amend the Constitution in order to do that. The compact, which I've supported and done work for, this is separate and apart from my responsibilities at the NDRC. I think it's something that makes a great deal of sense, where by state law, and it's state law that determines, as we've seen in this recent Supreme Court case, that decides how the states interact with the Electoral College. State law, if you say that a state's electoral ballots shall be cast for the winner of the national popular vote as opposed to the state popular vote, once you get a sufficient number of states to 270, you would therefore essentially eliminate the power of the Electoral College. So far, we've gotten, I think the count is up to about 190, maybe 195 electoral votes. States have said that they will support it. They have passed laws that are self-executing. Once they get to 270, all these state laws will come into effect. Michigan is one of the upcoming targets now to try to get Michigan to pass a law in that regard. And there, gerrymandering becomes important again, because again, if you've got gerrymandered Republican legislatures, it's hard to get a bill like that through the state legislature. And so we'll see. I think Republicans are now starting to catch on that this is something that could actually happen. And now you're starting to see more vocal opposition to the implementation of the compact, and getting these last 70 or so electoral votes, these states that have the necessary votes, I think is going to be more difficult. But I think it's a good option. It's one, again, that I think is constitutional. It's all a function of state law, and I think that would be the better way to elect our president. We're the only Western democracy that doesn't elect its leader, except for those with parliamentary systems, that doesn't elect its leader through a direct vote. And so, we've seen 2 of the last, 5 presidential elections where we've had the popular vote loser become president. And that's had some pretty significant consequences when you look at the presidencies of, George W. Bush and now Donald Trump.
So we have a number of state-specific questions here about various different anti-gerrymandering, and one is about a bill in Oregon. I don't know if you're familiar with state by state, the different initiatives that are going on, but people are asking about Oregon, and I can run through while you're answering that. I'll find the other states in the chat here. Are you familiar?
I'm not familiar with what's going on in Oregon. I don't know.
All right, we'll get back to that one. And I know I was looking here for questions related to Virginia and Texas and North Carolina. Can you give us a couple of examples of candidates in races in Texas and North Carolina that have an impact on this in particular?
Yeah, actually, I have some specific folks here. Let's see. I don't have I thought I had them in front of me here. Well, you know what? How about this? What we can do, Jeremy, is maybe I can get back to you and give you the list of the people who we have endorsed. If you look at my Twitter feed at Eric Holder, there is and also look at our NDRC feed, there's a list of all the people who I have endorsed in all the states that are our targets. Again, these are state candidates who have committed. They sign a pledge. They actually sign a pledge that says that they will stand for a fair redistricting process. And so if you go to, again, my Twitter feed or the Twitter feed of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, you can actually see the people who we have endorsed in the various states.
And specifically, if people want to get involved in their local areas in this kind of work, do you have a mechanism through one of your arms that gives people a chance to plug in locally?
Yeah, I mean, again, our advocacy group is called All on the Line, and we have in our target states state directors. So again, if you go to All on the Line, I'm All on the Line. I should know this .org.com, but look up Google All on the Line, one word, and it'll let you know where who our state directors are, how you can get in touch with our advocacy component, and how as individuals you can be involved in this effort. When I've been to California on any number of occasions, and I always hear people there say, well, we're in this blue state and we've got a commission and it works pretty well, but we want to be involved in anti-gerrymandering work. What is it that we can do? And what we have done through All on the Line is take people, for instance, California, it was in Colorado as well, I guess in 2019 when we were focusing on Virginia, and have people call in from California to Virginia, which is what we were doing in 2019, to make sure people in Virginia were aware of where their polling places were, who their candidates were, which candidates in Virginia were going to be supporting a fair redistricting process in 2021, to talk about gerrymandering. So even just in that way, through the use of the phones, one state, again, blue and with a good system, calling into other states. So it's a whole variety of ways that people can be involved. We have our state director, for instance, in North Carolina, I know was using people to monitor after we won our court victory in North Carolina, to monitor what was going on in the state legislature, and having people come to the state capitol and then monitoring over the internet as well, to make sure that things that were being done in real time, in which the court ordered the populace of the state to be able to observe, to make sure that we had people observing, as a state representative would go to the maps and try to change things around, to make sure that people were monitoring the activities of these involved politicians. So there's a whole range of ways in which people can get involved in our efforts, and I think you'll find it to be interesting, and ultimately, I think very rewarding.
A couple of questions for you about Supreme Court decisions recently. One, particularly about the intersection between the faithless elector decision and the national popular vote, if there's any interaction there, but also more generally on how some of the recent relevant decisions on voting rights, what implications they have for your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Supreme Court decision on the faithless elector, again, if the court is consistent, stare decisis, precedent matters, would seem to indicate, I think that case was, rightly decided. Electors have to do what the state law says. They can be penalized if they don't. State law governs. That would mean then that with regard to the compact, state law again should govern. And if a state decides that it wants to have its votes go to the national popular vote winner as opposed to the person who won the state popular vote, that I think should be seen as constitutional. The court, I think, surprised people on a number of decisions that have come down, recently, but has been pretty consistent. And Chief Justice Roberts, he's not liberal, but he's surprising every now and again. But he's been consistent when it comes to voting rights, having written, I think, the awful Shelby County decision that the court has really turned away from where I think it needs to be when it comes to the protection of voting rights. It's pretty consistently put itself on the side of what I would consider the unjust status quo. And so, at least for now, turning its back on the Florida effort to re-enfranchise people convicted of felonies, supported there by 63% of the people there. And you think about that, an election in a swing state where you get 63% of the people to say we're all in agreement, that's a pretty substantial number. But their local politicians, state politicians said, well, we'll try to get back at that by saying you can get re-enfranchised, but only if you pay all the fines and restitution, court costs that you owe. Lower courts said no, you can't do that. Supreme Court, at least for now, has said they're not going to allow the lower court decision to take effect. Other decisions by the court and by Chief Justice Roberts have not been friendly to the voting rights community. I think there's a suite of three cases. Citizens United, dark money into the system. The anti-gerrymandering case, where it said they're not going to allow the federal courts to hear partisan gerrymandering cases. And then Shelby County, that gutted the Voting Rights Act. I think those three cases are an indication of where the majority, the 5 members of the Supreme Court were and still are. And so racial gerrymandering, to be fair, racial gerrymandering cases, the court has been receptive to, and it was on the basis of the Supreme Court decision in the Virginia case that we brought. They were able to bring about the changes in the makeup of the state legislature there. But when it comes to partisan gerrymandering or other voter protection matters, the Supreme Court is not a friend of the voting rights community.
On the issue of mail-in voting, there's a number of questions in here, reports of the Postmaster General telling delivery people to leave mail behind that slows down their routes, other questions about funding, whether it's going to hold out through the election. Senator Warren has proposed that all mail-in ballots should be prepaid. Do you support that? Just a series of different questions about how to ensure that this mail voting, or as you said, vote at home, really can be fully implemented and ensured this fall.
Yeah, we have actually filed lawsuits in North Carolina, Texas, and Minnesota, and we're looking for other places that will bring cases as well to try to deal with a lot of the concerns about vote at home. to have prepaid postage, which, you sound like, well, what's the big deal? Well, think about, I mean, I don't know how many people get stamps, nowadays. I was thinking to myself, I put stamps on my stuff all the time. And when I said that, my wife said, well, where do you get your stamps? I said, well, they're just kind of here. And she said, well, she gets them, so how many times have you gone into a post office and bought stamps, recently? So, and there are studies that show, again, that people of color, communities of color, are negatively impacted by that stamp requirement. So we've said, all right, in the suits that we filed, have prepaid postage put on these things. Requirements that people have 2 witnesses sign a ballot that is done in a vote by mail process. Again, in the middle of a pandemic, we don't want people to have to require, get 2 other people to come and sign to attest to the fact that somebody is who they say they are. Again, when there's no indication of fraud with regard to the systems where that is not a requirement. North Carolina requires 2 voters actually, or a notary public to say that you are in fact the voter who you say you are. And then with regard to signature matches, again, we need a greater degree of flexibility. My kids, bright young people, they don't really have signatures. I mean, they do everything, with their hands. And if you look at their signatures, I mean, they have signatures, but they don't ever look alike. I mean, mine, my scrawl kind of looks the same. But my kids, and I think this is true of young people generally, don't have that same consistency in terms of their signatures. I mean, I took penmanship, when I was, in elementary school, back in the dark ages, back in the 20th century. My kids, you can look at them and see they obviously never took penmanship. But even now, I can print pretty well. I don't write. I don't use script anymore, except for my signature. My ability to write in script is not nearly as good as my ability to print. So again, we want to try to make more flexible, signature matching. So these are just some of the things that we have used in the basis of our lawsuits. We have settled a case in one we brought in Minnesota, where the authorities there have agreed to a consent decree. We're in court in Texas and in North Carolina with regard to vote by mail.
So it sounds like your household and my household are very, very similar in terms of everything from the lack of signatures for the children to the lack of stamps anywhere to be found. So these are shared challenges that we have. We were helpfully aided by several people who put into the Q&A that in fact you can use USPS.com to order stamps. So now you and I both know that is a possibility, and I hope this is a public service announcement for all those out there.
Well, I have the great Dr. Sharon Malone, who is my supplier of stamps. I don't know where she gets them, but they're magically here,
Exactly. Please send her my best.
I will.
And we are sort of coming towards the top of the hour, and I wanted to just give you a chance to come back again, since we do have several hundred people on this, and there'll be a lot of others watching this who may be interested in supporting your work. If you wouldn't mind, there's been a couple of requests to just outline one more time before the end of the call, if people are interested in supporting financially or in person, the various different pieces. I think you outlined 4 different pieces. If you could just run through them one more time so everybody's got it clear. Sure. And then we'll give you a final chance to wrap up.
Good. Well, we'd love to have your support, financial or otherwise. And the financial is what everybody always asks people for, and that's fine. That's very important. My finance director hates when I say that, and that's fine. That's important. But boy, we would love to have people sign up and be engaged, physically engaged in our activities. So look for the physical engagement. Look at our all on the line component. With regard to the financial, we have 3 buckets. Our 527, our PAC, which supports our electoral efforts. There we have a 527. We have a 501c3, which is obviously tax deductible. That supports the litigation that we are bringing around the country. With regard to you've heard me talk about vote at home, and then also with regard to the anti-gerrymandering stuff. And then we have a 501c4 that supports our advocacy work all on the line, as well as the infrastructure that we are in the process of, we are developing with regard to the technological capability that we want to have and that we will make available to people in the states cost free. So if you're an interested person in Washington State and you want to see what fair maps should look like in Washington, and it can be 10 fair maps, we'll generate those maps and then just give them to people so that people don't have to spend money. The Democratic Party doesn't have to spend money to generate these maps. We're going to be the clearinghouse when it comes to the generation of these maps, and that's supported by our 501c4. I mean, Jeremy, I guess here I'd end this way. It's this has been an emotional weekend for me. John Lewis was a dear friend, a mentor, a person who I came to know and love, who was very kind to me personally and to my family in good times and in hard times. And his loss is something that weighs, that weighs on me. He was a man who was, we hearing all kinds of flowery things about him, all well deserved, but he was a revolutionary. He was a person who not afraid to challenge the status quo. He bled for the things that he believed in. And one of the things that, and I'd say the thing that most animated his life was the protection of the right to vote. He's the one who presided over the passage of those good House bills with regard to electoral reform that I was talking about before. And I think that's, how fitting could that be? And so, I've been engaged in this work for some time as Attorney General, and before that, I said at my going away ceremony, I remember in the White House, that although I was leaving the office of the Attorney General, I was never going to leave the work. And when I thought about the work in my own mind, it meant protecting the right to vote. And with John's death, I'm kind of redoubling, my commitment to this. And I hope that people would look at his example and the way in which he led his life and be a part of this effort. And this is all about democracy saving. I'm a Democrat and I'm proud of that. But this is really bigger than Democrat. This is democracy. I'd say capital D, but people say small d because we don't want to confuse it with parties. But this is all about our democracy. What kind of democracy are we going to have? Dr. King said that the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. But it doesn't bend on its own. That arc only moves when people like John Lewis, like you all, like me, put our hands on that arc and pull it towards justice. And so that's what I would urge everybody to do. Find a way to put your hand on that arc and pull it towards justice, towards a better, more fair democracy. Our democracy is at stake in this November election, and then in the process that will occur in 2021 with regard to redistricting. And we can have an impact on that process. As I said before, we underestimate the power that we have as average American citizens. I've had a number of titles, in my life: Deputy Attorney General, Judge, AG. The one that I have now is the one I think I'm maybe most proud of. I'm an American citizen, and I have responsibilities as an American citizen. We all have civic responsibilities. We all have capacities that I don't think we necessarily understand that we can use. But with those capacities comes, great responsibilities. And so I would urge everybody, find a way to get involved. Find a way to do something. Graft onto your very important personal and business lives, and it won't be easy. 1, 2 hours, 3 hours a week to do something. I use this technique myself, and I actually do this, and this is something I would suggest. Sunday night around 7, 8 o'clock, I look back on the week that I've had, and I ask myself, what have I done? And then look about the week that is about to come, and I say, what am I going to do? And I will promise you, it may not be easy, again, but if you are able to sit down on a Sunday night and look back, you won't remember the difficulty that you had to get to a meeting, to do a Zoom, to be involved in something, but you're going to feel good about what it is that you did. And here, it doesn't have to be political. We can enhance our democracy and enhance our society if you get engaged with, programs that are focusing on young people who are starved for the kind of attention that we as adults can give them. There are a whole range of things that we need to do, things that I think John Lewis would want us to be involved in, political, social, but just getting involved, just getting involved. focused American citizenry will ultimately control the direction of this nation. As a young man, I saw a war ended in Vietnam, not because we met our military objectives, but because popular support, wasn't there. Women got the right to vote, not because it was their time, but because women decided that they were going to make sure that they took their right to vote. Segregation didn't end in the South because its time was over. It was because people, average American citizens, again, focused their attention, committed themselves, sacrificed, something we don't hear about enough, sacrificed so that it in fact would occur. And there was an alliance between Jews and people of color that needs to be enhanced, needs to be reformed. And there is that's a whole other topic that I, spend time with you on. But there was an historic alliance there that was unbelievably powerful, and it needs to be reformed given the challenges that both communities are facing today. We've seen a rise in anti-Semitism. We've seen a rise in hate crimes directed at Blacks and at Jews. We are natural allies, and too many idiots who get too much damn attention are putting wedges between us that are unnecessary and that are counterproductive. We need to stand against those people. So there's a whole range of things that I think we can do. I would urge everybody, for the memory of my friend, John Lewis, and for the memory of those who've come before us and done so much and sacrificed so much, for us all to become engaged. If we do, we can change the world. So let's do it.
Thank you so much. Those are very, very important and inspiring words. And you started out by citing the Jewish tradition of tikkun olam, to repair the world. And I'll close by saying that the commandment that we also have as a people is to pursue justice. And I think that it is that pursuit that marked John Lewis's whole life. He was an inspiration to you. He's an inspiration to me. He's an inspiration to all of us at J Street. And the pursuit of justice in this country will only happen if our democracy is actually functioning at 100%. And that is why the work that you're doing is so important. And we're honored to have a chance to promote it and to highlight our partnership. And we wish you all the best in the months ahead.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. All the best. Take care.
All right, take care.